distress of the spirits that have been captured and coerced into service by dark forces. And this is daily work for me. So what I'm looking for is scientific recognition of these daily facts. Every case that I work on is religiously recorded, scientifically recorded. Every conversation is recorded. Every case file is documented. Now, it was my intention to retire gracefully and go to live on the island of Crete and spend the rest of my days contemplating my navel and learning to play the guitar. But that wasn't to be, because as I was looking for somewhere to live, living in the back of a white van, I'm being constantly contacted by colleagues back home saying, "Terry, we've got another case." So I'm sitting in the back of my van on a beach in Crete, Skyping, dealing with cases every day. So I had to come back, because it has to be documented for scientific research. And this is why I'm presenting this to you today. How long have we got?
9 minutes.
Okay. So
That includes time for questions.
I haven't got time to read that latest case. So okay, let's stop talking and leave it open to questions. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions? Okay.
You alluded to scientific recognition. I think you have a big opportunity in your hands. There is more to science than documentation and reporting. But if the mediums that you know are so readily capable of communicating such a level of detail and when prompted, if there are so many spirits going around in hospitals, you could devise at least a single blind protocol where the medium does not know which hospital he's going to. And you could verify the medium's report afterwards without the medium knowing in advance where he was going to land. Maybe even a double-blind protocol where even you yourself does not know in advance, something chosen by a computer. That would be scientific. And if there are so many cases, you could even have statistics built around it and build a solid case. So the question is, why don't you do that?
It's a very, very good question. I will do that. So I will pose a question back to you. Are you volunteering to collaborate with me on this?
No. my not volunteering does in no way reduce the legitimacy of the comment or the question.
But I acknowledge what you say, and this is why I'm speaking about this, because I'm constantly looking for some kind of scientific institution that's going to validate my findings, validate my research, and give it credibility and collaborate with me. That's why I'm speaking. Kieran.
Thanks. Back in May when we had the other talk, I rated one incident that occurred in the hospital when I was with the Community Health Council. This one is a little bit more to do with what you've been talking about, Terry, which is myself and a couple of colleagues from the CHC, we were going to look at the chaplaincy service within the local hospital. Mm-hmm. Myself and two colleagues walked down to the chaplaincy, which is basically near the little chapel of rest that they have in the hospital. Mm-hmm. As we did so, I and my two colleagues noticed a woman walking up the corridor in a dazed state towards us. I knew what I was seeing, my colleagues didn't. Then a nurse came from the other direction, and she said to this woman walking up the corridor, the nurse came from behind us, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. You should be up in your ward. Go back to bed right now." And I sort of came up to them and said, "Excuse me, could you just..." And then at that precise point, we became aware of another more senior nurse coming towards that woman from behind us. The nurse I was speaking to froze in absolute terror and then backed against the wall and said, my God, she's here. And I said, no, please, give this a moment, it will work, it will be all right. The senior nurse led the woman back up the corridor past us, and I said to the nurse I'd been speaking to, now, please, would you get Father John, who was the priest for the hospital, and I said, this lady you will find in the chapel, and you will find her relatives around her in the viewing room. But Mr. Farrell, you couldn't possibly know that. Just please get Father John. And yes, there she was, and indeed, that lady was the spirit of the woman who had just passed and was in the chapel. My point here is not only to relate this particular incident, but also to say that my interpretation of the older senior nurse was that sometimes there are helper spirits, those who will guide people to the light, not just the dark forces who try and do nasty things to people. And that's what I'd like your comment on this.
Well, I agree. It is my belief that every hospital chaplain should have this knowledge that we're talking about here. It's an everyday occurrence. Yes, they do.
Yeah. This is quite astounding to me. I'm coming from Sweden, and I've never come across such cases. You mentioned that you have cases from Scandinavia. Certainly contact me and I'll investigate them. I must say I'm rather sceptical by nature. There's a book which I guess you know by Joe Fisher, Hungry Ghosts. He had contact with such spirits. When he investigated them, the peculiar thing was he found many of the facts that they gave about their former existence turned out to be correct, but they didn't exist. There's no documentation that these people ever existed.
2 points I'd like to pick up on for you, Adrian. The first is about the external validity of the existence of these spirits. And for me, this is a very simple thing to do. When we find the name, the identity of an earthbound spirit, we can go to public records and check the registry of births, marriages and deaths to check the validity of the identity of that person, and that in itself, for me, is a very simple scientific experiment. The other point you raised about Scandinavia, I've got 5 families in Finland, 2 in Sweden and 2 in Norway. And one in particular that springs to mind in Finland wanted, actually this is a principle that applies to all these cases. If you've got a case of serious psychosis where the patient is in hospital, they're on antipsychotic drugs, and then we, by telepathic means, we relieve that patient of the cause of the distress, so they no longer need the antipsychotic drugs, then they're released from hospital back to the family. This does happen. But the psychiatrists are at a loss to understand how they've recovered so quickly. And that in itself is interesting. But then the family come back to us and say, can you recommend a psychiatrist that we can go to for aftercare support? And there is none. So there's a need for that. There's a need everywhere, in every hospital, for people who are released from hospital after being on antipsychotic medication, who seem to be recovering. They need psychological aftercare support. So the work that I do in relieving them of the interfering spirits is only the first stage of a rehabilitation process. It's a big job to bring this into the mainstream.
Okay, last question from Bernard. I think we have questions.
Terence, within the spiritualistic hypothesis, what fraction of people dying in hospital get into this predicament? I mean, we have this vision of the NHS with all the patients in the corridor waiting to have operations. I've sort of got the impression that you've got, huge numbers of spirits hanging around. But is this a rare event? Is it a small fraction of people who, when they die in this picture, actually end up wandering around the hospital?
Well, that's an interesting question that does need research to attempt to answer it. But from my day-to-day experience of dealing with such cases, Every single case that I'm presented with, where the client is asking for help, in every single case, 100%, they have earthbound spirits attached to them. And very often, when these earthbound spirits are questioned, very often they are picked up in a hospital, but not always. An earthbound spirit can be picked up from the site of an ancient battle, from a haunted house. They can, earthbound spirits exist.
Yeah, but within a hospital, what fraction of people die in this picture end up wandering around the hospital not realising they're dead?
I really couldn't say. I couldn't say. And how would you investigate that?
Well, I mean, in other words, how many of these spirits are there in a given hospital, which you can then compare to the number of people dying?
I've got no idea, Bernard. I wouldn't know how to answer that question.
Okay, so we'll draw a line there. Thanks, Mick. Thank you very much, Terence,
And
for
thank
that.
you.
So the next speaker really doesn't need much of an introduction, actually. Our new president, Chris Rowe, from the Exceptional Experiences in Consciousness Research Centre at the University of Northampton. Nice to see you.